The National Desk, America's News Now.
Our nightmare is finally over and the good guys won.
A 2-week manhunt ends without a shot being fired. How police managed to get Danilo Cavalcante back behind bars. Deadline day approaches in Detroit. The clock ticks down to a strike, and the union isn't backing down.
We're the people that are making these companies money, and they need to pay us. They need to save us from, having to work another job.
Suicide rates in the U.S. have been on the rise. Coming up, what's providing hope for a reversal on this troubling trend? This is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Amiri David. Right now, we are 30 hours away from the end of the contract between the United Auto Workers and the big three automakers in Detroit, Ford, GM, and Stellantis. A full strike would pull 146,000 workers off their jobs and could bring the Motor City to a complete halt, with ripple effects seen across the entire economy. Negotiations are ongoing. Slow progress has been reported, and Ford is waiting on a response to its latest offer, one that the Ford CEO called the most generous offer they have made to the union in 80 years. Meantime, Stellantis made a new offer late this afternoon. The Associated Press reports the UAW union is considering targeted strikes at a handful of plants instead of an across-the-board walkout. But Union President Shawn Fain said today that he didn't agree with that characterization, and that all three companies should be ready for a work stoppage.
As it stands right now, all three are most likely to be struck unless we get a deal by September 14th at midnight. There is no lead company. All three are expected to deliver for their workers, and if they don't, there will be actions.
Meanwhile, some UAW members went on strike today. Roughly 1,100 workers with UAW Blue Cross Blue Shield walked off the job at 12:01 this afternoon as they, too, seek better pay and benefits. Let's turn now to Pennsylvania, where after 2 weeks on the run, a convicted killer who repeatedly evaded police capture has finally been caught. Danilo Cavalcante, the fugitive tying up city, state, and federal resources, was taken into custody this morning.
The whole point was to keep him stressed, to keep him moving, and keep him off his game so that he couldn't otherwise escape.
And take a look at these pictures. Cavalcante's capture came 8 hours after authorities were tipped off to a burglar alarm in the targeted search area. Shortly after, a DEA helicopter with thermal imaging picked up a heat signal from Cavalcante nearby, allowing authorities to close in on and capture him, bringing a sigh of relief to thousands of Chester County residents who've long been on edge, including the victim's family.
They were shrieking with joy and happiness that he's incarcerated. They have lived their own personal nightmare. I can't underscore enough the trauma that this family sustained.
Authorities say Cavalcante is being reprocessed and will eventually be transferred to a state institution to serve out his life sentence for fatally stabbing his ex-girlfriend in 2021. Right now, New England is bracing for Hurricane Lee. It could bring life-threatening storm surges and flooding to parts of Massachusetts starting on Friday. Now, parts of Maine could get hit with heavy rain and coastal flooding on Saturday. Lee is already bringing dangerous surf and rip currents to the East Coast and the Caribbean islands. And parts of Connecticut now flooded due to heavy rain unrelated to Lee. Areas in Massachusetts are under flash flood warnings today. It comes as residents in Massachusetts and Rhode Island are still cleaning up after major flooding over the last 2 days. It is a common complaint, especially from conservative political candidates. The federal government is just far too big. The latest to propose massive cuts is Republican presidential contender Vivek Ramaswamy, who has suggested eliminating entire agencies, including the FBI. Our Scott Thuman explains how these big ideas can be even bigger challenges.
There's no arguing the federal government is a behemoth, the country's largest employer with about 2 million civilian personnel. But some presidential candidates want to dramatically change that.
Mass layoffs are absolutely what I am bringing to the D.C. bureaucracy.
Among them, Vivek Ramaswamy, who recently told us while on the campaign trail his designs for dismantling the IRS, Department of Education, and in this case, the FBI.
35,000 or so employees. 20,000 of them are in back office functions. They're going to have to go home and find honest work in the private sector. But 15,000 of them are agents on the front lines. We'll move some of them to the U.S. Marshals, which has been more effective in pursuing child sex trafficking rings, or to the DEA on the front lines of taking on the fentanyl epidemic.
Axios reporting Ramaswamy wants to cut 1 million civilian jobs. He's not the only one ready to start slashing.
I'll also shut down the Federal Department of Education.
Though it's often easier said than done, since Congress, in many ways, has a larger say in how government functions. President Trump vowed to cut the federal footprint, but instead grew it almost 1% each year. For President Obama, it went up about 1/3%.
About 70% of that federal workforce is all about national security. I don't know how you get rid of 1 million federal employees and don't do unbelievably serious damage to our safety as a nation. And it's also the case that when you cut federal employees, you're also going to be just increasing the number of private contractors, and that's likely to increase costs and get you less good service.
And Max Stier says as critical events occur, government can grow due to emergencies, like the formation of the Transportation Security Administration after 9/11. In other words, campaign promises can be very hard to keep. And to that point, Stier says that morale is another issue. If you're telling literally hundreds of thousands of employees that their jobs are either irrelevant or could be replaced, that can sometimes impact how they function moving forward. Amira?
Yeah, Scott, this is quite a proposal. What do we know about how this sits with people politically?
Well, like smaller arguments, or rather, arguments for a smaller government have long been kind of a talking point for the Republican Party specifically, although both parties agree there is a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse across this entire government. That's something that could be confined, constrained, and improve the function of Washington. How you get to that point is another argument.
The conversation continues. Scott Thuman live in Washington, D.C. Thank you for that report. Well, no legal basis to keep Trump off the primary ballot. That's what New Hampshire's Secretary of State said today, choosing not to invoke a constitutional amendment that prohibits those who have engaged in insurrection or rebellion from holding higher office.
The 14th Amendment, if you look at the language, it's a prohibition against holding the office. It says nothing about the election process.
Scattered lawsuits in several states have been filed making the same claim, and each Secretary of State is expected to respond. Regardless, experts believe this is an issue that will likely only be settled by the Supreme Court. Meanwhile, a federal judge ruled that former President Donald Trump will be restricted in how he looks at or even can talk about the classified information in the Mar-a-Lago documents case. Judge Eileen Cannon's order largely follows special counsel Jack Smith's request to protect these documents as the case revolves around mishandling of classified intel by the former president. Judge Cannon did not make a ruling yet on if Trump could have a secured viewing area called a SCIF at one of his properties. Meantime, another loss in court for Trump allies. A district judge rejected Mark Meadows' motion to delay the election interference trial against him while he appeals the decision to keep his case in state court. Meadows' official trial date has not been set yet, but it could take place as early as October 23rd and be over before his appeal is even heard. And under consideration right now, a mistrial for Peter Navarro in the wake of his guilty verdict for contempt of Congress. Attorneys for Navarro, a former Trump advisor who stood trial for defying a January 6th subpoena, now say the verdict should be thrown out based on the revelation that a federal courthouse employee escorted the jury in the case outside for a, quote, fresh air break, exposing them to a slew of protesters that could have altered their decision in the matter. A hearing on a mistrial motion will be scheduled in 2 weeks. Hunter Biden's lawyers filed a lawsuit against a former Trump White House staffer for allegedly publishing online a series of emails and photos that may have initially come from the laptop that was left at a computer repair shop. The federal lawsuit targets Garrett Ziegler and 10 unnamed co-defendants. Hunter Biden is seeking damages and an injunction against further publication of any documents in a jury trial. The White House, meantime, is pushing back against criticism over a prisoner exchange with Iran. The U.S. announced it will unfreeze $6 billion in Iranian oil revenue and release 5 Iranian citizens in exchange for 5 Americans. Critics say it will further incentivize rogue regimes to unlawfully detain U.S. citizens. The National Security Council's John Kirby says bad actors don't need any incentive, and the funds can only be used for humanitarian needs.
If Iran tries to divert the funds, we'll take action and we'll lock them up again. I also want to be clear. This is not a payment of any kind. It's not ransom. These aren't U.S. taxpayer dollars. And we haven't lifted a single one of our sanctions on Iran.
Still, critics say it will allow Iran to put money toward other things, like its nuclear program. Kirby says the U.S. will continue to hold Iran accountable. A series of meetings about artificial intelligence have kicked off in D.C. Top tech leaders like Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg attended an AI hearing today on Capitol Hill.
It was a very civilized discussion, actually, among some of the smartest people in the world.
Senators say everyone in their chamber and all the executives agree the government needs to regulate artificial intelligence and the U.S. needs to lead. What types of regulations and possible new federal oversight agencies, that remains unclear. More than 70,000 child care providers across the country could soon shut down. That's according to the Century Foundation. The providers benefited from the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. It gave states funds to keep services open, but the program expires at the end of the month. Researchers say the change could impact about 3.2 million kids. And condolences, they are pouring in for Alaska Congresswoman Mary Peltola, whose husband tragically died in a plane crash. Went down shortly after takeoff early this morning, and only Peltola's husband, Eugene, was on board. The Congresswoman has returned to Alaska to grieve with her family. Coming up, new details in House Speaker Kevin McCarthy's impeachment inquiry into President Biden as Democrats continue to call it a partisan investigation. Then the latest hearing on school book bans led to some shocking moments on Capitol Hill. And vaping at a school in Maine is causing problems well beyond the health impacts, the damage that could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to fix. We're back in just 90 seconds.
At the end of another term, I'd be in my mid-80s. Frankly, it's time for a new generation of leaders.
Utah Senator Mitt Romney is officially not seeking re-election, and in his almost 3-minute video statement, without directly speaking about President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump's ages, he called them both out for being, quote, out of touch with today's voters. If nothing else, age is a concern for most voters. A CBS YouGov poll released this week says 77% of all Americans believe there should be age limits for elected officials. House Oversight Chairman James Comer spoke of some of the evidence today that led Speaker McCarthy to open a formal impeachment inquiry into President Joe Biden, calling into question the idea that then Vice President Biden committed no crimes. While House Democrats, on the other hand, maintain this is a partisan investigation with no concrete evidence to back the claims of the majority party in the House.
We found 20 shell companies. So the bank alleging that the Bidens took a suspicious wire from the Chinese government and then laundered it through these shell companies. There's many laws broken there.
Their only priority is to hurt Joe Biden politically and to help Donald Trump get reelected. This is a Donald Trump revenge tour that Republicans have signed on to, lock, stock, and barrel.
Now, we could see some of the alleged evidence soon, as Chairman Comer says the first hearings will be held before the end of the month. The latest tussle over what books should be allowed in public school libraries led to shocking moments on Capitol Hill. Here's national correspondent Kayla Gaskins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
More than a few faces on Capitol Hill turning red Tuesday as Senator John Kennedy read explicit passages from two controversial books at the center of the book ban debate.
The first one is called All Boys Aren't Blue. He asked me to turn over.
Next, the senator read from Gender Queer.
I can't wait to put it on you.
So-called book banning in schools and libraries turning deeply political across the country. In Illinois, a new law discourages so-called book bans, and its Secretary of State accuses Republicans of cherry-picking passages to push a narrative.
Our libraries have become targets by a movement that disingenuously claims to pursue freedom, but is instead promoting authoritarianism.
The other side of the debate says they aren't advocating for bans at all. One can still buy these books on Amazon. They simply believe they have no place in elementary schools.
As a society, we don't put Playboy in kindergartens. This isn't considered a book ban, but common sense.
Are you suggesting that only librarians should decide whether the two books that I just referenced should be available to kids? Is that what you're saying?
No.
No one is advocating for sexually explicit content to be available in an elementary school library or a children's section of a library.
But some argue these books do benefit kids. For example, All Boys Aren't Blue covers sexual abuse.
Students who do not read books like All Boys Aren't Blue cannot learn what is appropriate.
I understand that.
They cannot learn.
I understand, but none of you want to answer.
The American Library Association says the number of book challenges doubled from 2021 to 2022. The debate appears to only be gaining momentum. In Washington, I'm Kayla Gaskins for the National Desk, America's News Now.
Inflation jumped higher last month. The Labor Department reporting today prices were up about 3.7% in August, all when compared to a year before. That was up about 3.2% from July. Authorities say a spike in gas prices pushed inflation up. Core inflation, which leaves out food and energy prices, actually went down in August when compared to July. Russian President Vladimir Putin says Russia is considering military cooperation with North Korea, all following today's meeting between Putin and Kim Jong-un. The leaders did meet at a Russian rocket launch facility. That's according to state media. Kim offered full and unconditional support for Russia to defend its security interests. Analysts think Kim wants economic aid, among other priorities. Experts say Putin will probably ask North Korea to refill his country's ammunition supply. Suicide is now the second leading cause of death in young people. A new study released by Cincinnati Children's Hospital shows there is a way to lower that number. Medical reporter Liz Bonis shares a new study on prevention programs in schools.
Hey there, everybody. Hello to you. This study, one of the first of its kind to take a comprehensive look at what kind of programs really work in schools to help prevent suicides in youth.
I was cutting, I was burning myself, really anything to make a different type of pain.
Ellie Sweeney says when she realized self-harm was becoming a regular part of her life in the pandemic, she got connected to a counselor at Ohio's Central Clinic Behavioral Health.
Definitely seek help, 100% seek help. If your home life is good, tell your parents, and if you think it's something severe, then you can always check yourself into inpatient to get severe help if you need it.
Now that school is back in session, however, the team at Cincinnati Children's Hospital says this new study, just released in the Archives of Suicide Research, says the best school-based programs for suicide prevention need to reach out directly to the Ellies. Dr. Landon Krantz says their review of more than a dozen evidence-based school suicide prevention programs found rather than teaching adults and teachers the early warning signs a child may be at risk,
programs that are designed for the students so that teach kids, here's how you recognize risks in yourself. Here's what to do when you need help. Here's how to improve your social emotional skills to be, improve your mental health. Those types of programs seem to be more effective for suicide prevention than programs that prepare adults or teachers on how to pay attention to the signs or how to help kids out.
The second thing that works, he says, is in school-based programs, you need to talk to all kids directly, not just those at risk.
Considering there's a national crisis and considering 10% of kids report having a suicide attempt last year, it makes sense to do a universal prevention program.
We do remind you, if you or someone you know is showing signs or expressing suicidal thoughts, use the free Suicide and Crisis Helpline by calling 988. That number available in both English and Spanish. It will connect you to resources in your area. I'm medical reporter Liz Bonus. Back to you.
Okay, Liz, thank you. Coming up, vaping at a high school is causing problems well beyond the health impacts that could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to fix. We'll be right back. Right in your neighborhoods, we are covering issues that matter to you. We are taking the pulse of America. At a Maine school, vaping is causing problems beyond the health impacts. Students are reportedly dumping disposable vapes down the toilets, causing plumbing and water pressure issues. It could potentially cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to repair. School officials say it's just part of a much larger issue, and one parent agrees.
Regulating vaping anywhere, it's so hard. There's so many different devices, and it'd be nice to have, that limited a little more.
The school says it's been aggressively prohibiting vaping on school grounds.
The surge in auto thefts still sweeping across Baltimore, and the majority of criminals are getting away with the crime. According to the latest data posted by Baltimore police, of the 7,077 auto thefts reported so far this year, there have been 215 arrests. That's 3%. A 3% chance that stealing a car or attempting to steal one in Baltimore will land a criminal in handcuffs.
That statistic alone is a sort of a commentary of where we are.
That's a city in need of solutions.
In California, a last-minute deal between fast food giants and labor unions could determine whether fast food workers get a big wage increase. If the proposed bill passes and is signed by the governor, about 500,000 workers will get a big raise in April to $20 an hour. Could also lead to higher prices, though, for consumers. An American astronaut just accidentally broke a record for how long he's been in space. What he said today on a call to NASA. Well, here's something you don't see every day. A Mexican journalist presented what he claims are 2 extraterrestrial corpses while testifying before the Mexican Congress. He said that they were mummified aliens discovered in a Peruvian mine. He said the U.S. Pentagon knew about them but refused to display them, although the journalist has made similar claims before that were debunked. And NASA's administrator made an important phone call today to outer space to check in with astronaut Frank Rubio, who just accidentally broke the record for the longest space mission by a U.S. astronaut.
Frank, you've made all kind of records up there, and you've had 6 months that you didn't expect. How are you feeling?
Hey, sir. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It was unexpected. In some ways, it's been an incredible challenge, but in other ways, it's been an incredible blessing.
Wow, and Rubio has been in space for nearly a year after his mission was extended due to a coolant leak on the spacecraft. He's set to land on Earth this month. That would be after 371 days in space, soon to experience gravity once again. Really amazing. That does it for this edition of the National Desk. We invite you to join us again this evening for more. I'm Amira David. Thanks so much for watching.